Cool. Okay, so welcome to the second installment of Office Hours from Thoughtful Leader. This session is all about leading quietly. So a few tips I've got for more introverted or reserved or quieter leaders. And I find that a lot of my Thoughtful Leader audience sort of fit into that category, not necessarily introverted, but more thoughtful, like to be introspective and maybe a little bit quieter. So not all of them, but quite a few. So as usual, this session will be about 10 or so minutes, little presentation at the start, and then the rest of it sort of open time for questions if you have any. So, and feel free to ask any questions as we go as well. All right. So the first off, we'll look at the agenda here, and it's pretty simple. We're going to look at a real quick overview of introversion, what it is and what it isn't. We'll look at how you can balance that, what I call self-acceptance and adapting your style, because I think it's important to be quite to accept the way you are, but then to adapt when you need to, rather than feeling stuck that you have to be acting introverted or quietly the whole time. Then we'll talk about recovering your energy, what that looks like, and the importance of that. Understanding what matters as well. So that's really important to make decisions about when you'll speak up or when you won't speak up and those sort of things, which I find really helpful for quieter leaders in particular. Then we'll talk a little bit about using process to help you be a little bit more outgoing if you need to. We'll talk more about what that means in a minute. And also we want to hold other people accountable for their opinions as well. So in terms of um, sometimes people will say things to us like, you should be more louder, you should be more outgoing, you should speak up more, all those sort of things. And I think it's important to hold other people accountable for those statements and then find out really why that's a problem or why that needs to happen. And then after that, we'll jump into the Q&A if we have any questions. And the questions can be about the presentation, or it can just be open questions, general questions. So in terms of introversion in general, so a lot of people think that introversion is about being shy and quiet, and yes, it can be, but it's actually about where you get your energy from. And what they introverts generally prefer low stimulation environments, which basically means, generally lower noise, less people, less interaction, that sort of stuff. So it doesn't mean that we don't want to talk to anyone, and I'm an introvert myself, but it just means that generally we prefer those low stimulation environments as opposed to an extrovert, which might be preferring the high stimulation environments, which are things like, it might be loud noises, concerts, a lot of conversation, big groups, parties, that sort of stuff. But you can see that, well, introversion and extroversion is on a bell curve. So basically, from left to right, you would have introverted on the left, extrovert on the right. But you can see in the middle here, on a standard deviation, the bulk of us are going to be somewhere in this middle, because that's where most people lie on the spectrum. So the interesting thing is that that means that even if you're on the introverted side, you're likely to have some extroverted qualities as well. It's not just we're all introverts or all extroverts. And sometimes they call the people in the middle here ambiverts if you're right near the center line, which means you basically have the qualities of both. So really one thing to remember is it's about where you get your energy from and what environments you prefer rather than um, rather than you being shy or quiet or things like that. So I think that's an important distinction to make. It's also not a fixed trait, as in it's innate to us, but we don't have to act introverted all the time. We can adapt our style, and we'll talk about that right now, actually. So I think it's important to find the balance as well. So, and the balance I'm talking about here is between being yourself and adapting to the style of others or becoming more extroverted in certain situations. So that might be speaking up in meetings, or it might be doing some public speaking, giving a presentation, just being a bit more outgoing sometimes. So it's important to not get stuck in the introversion sort of trap where it's like, well, I can't public speak, or I can't say anything, or I don't like networking, all those things, because it's going to be quite limiting. So what I encourage people to do is to basically we want to find that self-acceptance where we're happy with how we are, but we realize that we do better sometimes if we adapt our style to suit the situation better. So if I'm meeting with more outgoing people, I might be more upbeat and lively temporarily, and then I'll go back to my normal style. If you have to do some public speaking or give a presentation or speak up in a meeting, you might adapt your style as well. So you might choose to change your style. I do meet some introverts who usually they're on the heavily introverted side of the scale and they sort of refuse to adapt their style. They sort of think, well, this is my personality and you can take it or leave it. I think that's not very good because it's a limiting thing. You're going to miss opportunities. You're basically potentially going to be limited because other people will expect you to be more outgoing in some situations, and sometimes you'll do better if you appear more outgoing and speak up a bit more. So, and that includes being more expressive as well. I do meet some introverts who aren't very expressive, and I would say personally, I'm not that expressive myself in terms of facial expression. But I think sometimes it can build rapport if you mirror the sort of facial expressions or the actions of others as well. So I think it's important to find the balance. We want to be happy with who we are, but we also want to acknowledge that no, we're going to have to adapt our style sometimes. And extroverts have the same challenge. They just adapt in different ways. Another thing to consider for introverts or quieter leaders is to play to your strengths. So working out what your strengths are and in the situations where you do really well and using those as best you can. So what I found out a few years ago, I used a an assessment. I've talked about it in my blog posts a few times called Clifton's Strengths. And there's also, I think it's been taken over by Gallup now, the company Gallup. But you can Google that. If you Google Gallup Strengths or Clifton's Strengths, whatever you want, you'll see you can do a survey there. It takes about 30 minutes, quite a big survey. And yeah, I think you have to pay, last time I checked was $80 Australian, I believe. And basically you get a big report with your top strengths on it. And it goes into some detail about how to use your strengths and why they're strengths. And one of my top strengths when I did that assessment years ago was called relator, which basically means I do my best relationship building one-on-one or in small environments, like small groups of people. And as an introvert, that suits me really well because it doesn't sap all my energy. And it means that I can build that connection by asking, talking deeply with someone rather than just doing small talk with a big group of people. So that's what I mean by playing to your strengths. So work out what you're good at, what environments you thrive in, and then try to use those more often. Because we don't always have to, for example, we don't always have to go to a big networking event to network with people. You can do it one-on-one as well. So um, that's what I mean. You can adapt. We can adapt the situation to suit our style a bit better as well. So that's playing to your strengths. The next thing to consider is recovering your energy and how do you do that? So some thoughtful leaders are in the position where they can do this quite frequently. Maybe they have a role which means they are doing a lot of computer work or desk work or spreadsheet type things or analysis where they get time to recover their energy in low stimulation environments. Other ones, like in my career, I used to do a lot of consulting work for a while and I did a lot of project management and obviously leadership roles as well. And that takes a lot of energy because the people side of things means engaging with people, giving meetings and presentations and all that sort of stuff. So it's important to be able to recover. And there's a guy, a professor, retired professor from Harvard called Brian Little. And I've written about him before. And he talks about this concept of restoration or restorative niches, which is sort of an academic term, but really he's talking about opportunities in your day to de-stress and recover your energy. And so the recommendation here is find out ways to do that. So some of the ways I used to do that was I used to book a meeting room for myself for maybe half an hour during the day where I could check my email and do some quiet work by myself without being interrupted. So that was a really good one for me. Things like taking a walk outside in lunchtime, for example, or taking a coffee break, walking outside for 10 minutes. Um, yeah, just finding that low stimulation environment for you to recover your energy throughout the day and trying to build in as many of those as you can. Because as an introvert, you are going to become very drained if you have to constantly be extroverted all day with no time to recover. So the question there is, okay, how do you build that into your day? And it could be as simple as some time management techniques, right? Um, an hour meeting, you make it become 45 minutes or 50 minutes. Those sort of little tricks can be quite useful as well because you get 10 to 15 minutes back in your day where you can relax or de-stress between other meetings, especially if you're a leader who has lots of back-to-back meetings. So think about opportunities like that as well. The next part of being a quieter leader is understanding what matters to you. And this is actually important for all leaders, but I find when you're an introvert or quieter leader or person, it can be useful to have a decision-making tool to help you decide when you'll adapt your style. So tools that I'm talking about here are things like personal values, and I'm big on this, and I've talked about it a lot. I've got an online course on my website. I've got several articles about personal values, so you can read those as well. Um, but understanding your personal values is really important because it helps you make decisions about what's important to you and when you'll choose to speak up, and maybe when you'll choose to stay quiet, or when you can let something go, or when you have to stand up for yourself, for example. Another concept which comes from Brian Little again, the Harvard professor, was personal projects, he calls them, which are these are your passion areas where you're really passionate about a certain topic or area of your life. So it could be your family or your pets or your work or your career, whatever it is. These are things where you will decide to adapt your style and maybe you will be more outgoing in those situations. So, for example, Brian Little talks about he's quite a introvert, but he does a lot of speaking and presentations and lectures because he's passionate about his research. So he chooses to adapt his style and become more outgoing during those times. And then normally he's more introverted. So understanding what matters is really important. And obviously, there's a bit of work to do in this section about understanding what matters, but there's resources on my website you can find, such as my blog posts or online courses and those sort of things. So check those out if you are interested. And yeah, it's a really valuable exercise, the personal value stuff. I can't emphasize that enough. I consider it to be a really important foundation for good leadership. The other thing that I find useful is using process to help you as an introverted or quieter leader. So what I mean by this is sometimes you won't feel like being more outgoing because sometimes you're tired or, your natural environment is low stress or low stimulation. So sometimes it's good to build into our schedule times where we will become more outgoing. So, for example, it can be really beneficial for thoughtful leaders to sometimes, if they're not outgoing, to force themselves to be outgoing. And some of the ways we do this is, we talk about there's a management style sometimes I've heard to refer to as leading by walking around. And it literally means you're out and about, you're seeing the workplace, you're building connections and having conversations with people in the office, or wherever you are. And this can be something that's really beneficial and it doesn't come naturally to thoughtful leaders or, more introverted thoughtful leaders anyway, because sometimes it's daunting or tiring to do that. So what I'd suggest is sometimes putting things in your calendar, like meet with my team at this time, or walk around the office, or go greet the store person, or whatever it is, right? Put those things into your schedule so that they're more, you're reminded of them, and they sort of give you a bit of a nudge to go and do the thing that you think is important, but maybe feel a bit tired to do. And that means building it into our schedule. So that's what I mean by process, using a process to help you. Because often when we make a commitment, so maybe we set a meeting or something like that, or a reminder, often when we make that small commitment, it becomes more likely we're going to follow it through. So build in some things into your calendar to help you get out and about and maybe be a bit more outgoing and extroverted to build connections with people. And that can be a really beneficial thing to do as well, because you won't always feel like it. And the second last thing I'm going to talk about here is holding others accountable for their opinions. So I've heard it quite a lot. Sometimes leaders, well, people will say, like your manager will say, oh, you need to be louder, you need to be more outgoing, you need to be more extroverted, whatever terms they use. What I'm interested in here is that a lot of people will just say that stuff because it's their own style. So they think you should be louder because they're louder. But that's not how thoughtful leaders necessarily are all the time. So what I recommend here is even just digging into if you hear a comment like that, oh, you should be louder, or you should be more outgoing, something similar to that, ask what it is that the person needs to see from you. So, for example, if someone says, oh, you need to be louder in meetings, I would ask them, okay, what is it that you're missing here? What would you like to see? What's the outcome you think I can get from doing that? And try to get them a bit more to think a bit more about their comments, about specifically what they want to be out, what they want to see, what's the difference they want to see, and why is that important? Because sometimes people can't back it up. They can't back up that statement with any real facts or evidence that they want to see anything different. They just think that you're too quiet. But quiet leaders can also be excellent leaders. So there's no real reason to run around being extroverted just because someone says so if they can't justify why. So I think it's good to hold people accountable for that reason and simply by getting more specific, asking them for more specifics, because sometimes they might say things like, oh, you need to build more connections with people in the workplace, right? With other managers or something like that. And that means that they're telling you to be more outgoing. Well, actually, you could build connections one-on-one by having coffee catch-ups with people. So you don't have to do it just the extroverted way, just because an extrovert tells you to. So that's what I'm getting at there. And the last thing I'll mention, I don't have a separate page for this. The last thing I'll mention is practice. So practice this adapting as well. When you feel like, oh, I wish I'd said that thing in the meeting, or should I speak up or should I not? Set yourself a little goal to say, okay, in the next week, I'm going to speak up one more time than I did last week, or I'm going to speak up 3 times, or I'm going to do something that I normally find uncomfortable, like I'm going to volunteer to give a presentation, or I'm going to volunteer to run the meeting, or I'm going to go to a networking event, or I'm going to meet someone for coffee. Whatever it is, push yourself, and I challenge you to, challenge you to set yourself a little challenge of something you might do differently to adapt your approach. So from rather than being in your quieter self, maybe you speak up more, maybe you give a presentation, whatever it might be. Set yourself a little target and just try to stretch yourself because over time you'll become more comfortable. Because I personally, I used to be a terrible public speaker, used to be very nervous and avoided it like the plague. And now I went to a public speaking group for 2 years called Toastmasters, which I highly recommend if you're interested in that. But now I don't really feel too nervous about public speaking at all. I do it a lot as part of my job now. I've learned to adapt my style and I've become more comfortable over time because we push our comfort zone. As we get out of our comfort zone expands a little bit each time. And eventually your comfort zone will be much bigger and you'll look back and you'll go, oh, I used to be really worried about doing that thing. Now I don't worry about it at all. So I'd encourage you to push yourself and practice the skills you need to practice to get better because you'll become more confident and you won't become an extrovert, but you will become better at adapting your style. And that's really the important part. So those are the tips I've got for you as an introverted leader, myself, having battled some of these things. Um, and now we're into the Q&A bit. So I'll stop recording for this portion and get onto any questions people have.